either.
I don't
Yes.
have any really.
Okay, I would like to call this meeting to order. It is September 24th, 6:30 on the dot, and we need a roll call. So Joe.
Johnner here.
Reyes here.
Jones here.
Church here.
Leonard here.
Clerk Buchanan, did we meet all certification of compliance for open meeting law?
We are.
So then we are to the primary objective for tonight, and that is the presentation from the organizational assessment that Public Administration Associates put together after we approved it in like June timeframe. So it's all yours, David.
Where would you like me to present from? I don't want everybody to crane their necks here, but is this okay here?
We can
Yeah,
go to the front.
I think
if
the
you want.
microphone actually
Okay.
picks up on the video too, so that might be a good place. Yes?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, let me hand out, oh, thank you very much.
We can pass them down too.
Yeah,
I was gonna move out there.
Remember than the clerk, I think if that's.
Thanks, Ty. We can
We got-
follow along.
We got so much to do. All right. So, my name is Dave Brettel. I'm from Public Administration Associates, and as Chair Jones had indicated, you had retained our company earlier in the year to do an organizational assessment, which was not intended to be a complete or thorough deep dive of every issue that the town has, but more of a survey for us to come in to talk with staff, to look at some of your key documents, and to make some recommendations to you of things that can be implemented. I had spent my career in government, and I tend to prefer studies that you can actually do something with, because oftentimes you get them and they stick them on the shelf, and so maybe some of these may seem like simple answers to you, but they are the product of thought and two things that we think that you can implement and that you will have improvements in your organization if you do so. Just by way of background, my partner Chris has gotten detained a little bit here. He'll be joining us later, but I thought we can certainly get this started, and he'll be here for questions and to talk about some of the parts that he did. So I want to take a little bit of a pause now and just talk about kind of an experience that this may or may not resonate with you. So 2 years ago, I was brought in as an interim administrator in a town in southeast Wisconsin that it was a village that had actually replaced 3 of their board members, right? A new chair and 2 new board members. And there was quite a lot of upheaval at the time. There was considerable differences of opinion during the election, let's say. And so I mention that because it really carried over into the start of that new term for that board. And it was interesting because some of it was differences of opinion on how things should be run or how things were always run. But a lot of it was just flat out miscommunication, that people drew and Chris is here, and I just got him started. Chris, people drew conclusions that were not necessarily true, and I can tell you what those were. So for the new board members who were coming in, had some serious philosophical differences with the old board members, but not necessarily with staff, right? So staff is sitting here thinking, well, these people are joining the board, they don't like us, they don't think we've been doing a good job because they obviously want change. Well, that's not true either, right? I mean, necessarily true. So a lot of it was just communication, just to sit down and say, hey, this is the way the system works, we're the new board, and some existing board members, but just to have that conversation and to clear the air. It wasn't a referendum on staff, I don't believe, and both Chris and I think that you have a very quality workforce and staff here, and some valuable employees who know a lot about town government and government. So I just put that out, that communication, education is going to be the key to this. Now, by the same token, that doesn't mean just because new members are coming to the board that their ideas shouldn't be valued or that they don't understand anything. Sometimes those new ideas are just what the organization needs. So respect needs to be given to that too, and for staff to be able to take the direction of the board and to implement that in day-to-day operations. And I think that's what I see right now, and Chris might have a little bit different take on it, but I think we've got a lot of people, both as supervisors and as staff, who really have the best interests in the community in mind, and who are really passionate about the town of East Troy, but different visions about what that means, and that's okay. That's healthy. But you got to talk through those and then set that direction, and that's the board's responsibility ultimately to do, with input from stakeholders, from members of the community, from your staff, from your management team, right? But to come up with what that vision is, and so one of our recommendations is going to be strategic planning, which is not an overnight process, but is something that I think is important, because before you can say, well, staff isn't implementing what it is we want. You need to decide what that is, and that can mean different things to different people. And gosh, Chris and I have seen this in government. Some people aspire to be the lowest tax community. That's a very important thing, to have a very low tax rate. Others want a high level of service, and then there's all these variations in between, right? So the key is just to decide what it is that you want to be as a community and as a town, and to get together and agree, or even agree to disagree on some of those main points, and then to move forward as an organization. I don't know, Chris, anything just about the general levels of staffing staff? We had a good experience.
Yeah, we had a very good experience. You have a very efficient and effective staff, there's no doubt about it. There are some things that improve the organization, but time permitting, and you gotta let time permit to improve. But no, we did a very thorough review, and the staff gave us everything they needed. We appreciate that, and they do have a very effective and efficient staff. So we got some work to do, I think.
And so that's, we kind of set the stage with that, because the comments that are going to come are not an indictment of any individual in the organization, right? It's not to chastise anyone, because we think overall you got a staff that runs things well. So let's start out with the first recommendation that both Chris and I had come up with, and if we can get you on the next slide there, which is, we think that you would benefit from an administrator. And that can mean a lot of different things. There are 2 town administrators in the county, in Delavan, and I'm doing one right now in the town of Lynn, so there certainly is precedent for that. There's also villages with much smaller populations than yours that have administrators. And so why do we make that recommendation? It isn't to babysit staff, it isn't to make sure that they're coming in on time, or that members of your management team are taking appropriate lunch breaks or anything like that. They are a self-starting group, and they're knowledgeable in what they do. We feel that it changes the communication flow, and that it would really benefit this organization, because you have a single point of contact then in town hall that communicates with your board chair, with your board, and on a regular basis, and can meet and take those ideas, communicate them to staff, get the ideas back from staff, and then communicate that to the board. We think that you might want to start out to do this on a part-time basis, and I say that with a little bit of hesitation, because everybody is pretty busy here with their day jobs, the regular jobs that they're doing, but we think that a member of staff could potentially do that with an appropriate stipend, and it wouldn't necessarily relieve them of all their day-to-day duties of their other job, but we think that it would really be a benefit to your organization. I don't know, Chris, anything on that?
Town of Rome, I just did a study for Town of Rome, and I didn't think they were ready for a full-time administrator. My study said that the police chief is a great leader. I think he'd be a good administrator, and he did a great job. So, So, you know, that's an example of the town of Rome, which is Lake Arrowhead up that way. So there's precedent for that.
I think conducting regular department head meetings, and you can, you know, again, there's a danger here with some of the stuff that we're talking about, and you might think that we're scaled too large because to have a department head meeting, you should have 15 department heads or a huge building or something like that, but it's more about the communication and the regularity of it and the process that's more important than, you know, you can all get together in a minute or 30 seconds here, you know, but to have a regular department head meeting, to get the concerns and the beefs and the good ideas of the department heads to then for that administrator to meet regularly with the town board chair. You've got the administrator at all the meetings, you making recommendations to the board. We just feel that would be kind of those low-hanging fruit. Any questions? I will take questions at the end of this too, and we can keep marching along here.
We have department head meetings almost every day,
Good.
the three of
And
us.
do those ideas get communicated out then to the board?
Yeah, I mean, we all converse, so, to the board. And
Yeah.
things are brought
To
to
the
the board,
board?
to the meeting, yeah. Things are brought, you know, we're allowed to put stuff on the agenda, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say in that process, having somebody who consistently reports out probably and meets with the chair is, I guess, what we're recommending.
Would you recommend that be not someone that's on the board, somebody that's already on staff, or bringing somebody in?
I think it couldn't be a board member, so by law, you can't
Okay.
do both. But I think you could either task a management team member with it, with a part-time kind of, and see how it goes, it might be overwhelming. Or you could bring somebody in from the outside. That could be a fairly expensive position and maybe more than what you'd want to do right now.
Sure, okay.
And it would be, conceivably somebody would do it on a part-time basis, but that would be probably pretty tough to recruit unless you had somebody in the community who was used to doing that. So, second item that we had on here is to conduct board training. And this, I think, is something that's very important, particularly when you have a turnover in the board. And again, it's, I was a board member, you could say, on the school board, and I was, kind of the outside looking in, and I didn't like a lot of the things that they did, and so I didn't even trust their training when I was a board member. I wasn't even sure what they were telling me staff was correct. But what was important in that is education, and you can get, I did this at the county, just have a regular schedule of a training night. Maybe it's quarterly. Take on a topic each night. I had some public records, open meetings. You could take on code of ethics for local government officials, duties of different town officials, officers, you name it, tax levy, and tax cap as a night. You could have each department come in even quarterly just to, pretend you're starting from day one. This is what we do. That's what we would do in the county is we'd have, new board members and we'd have the department heads come in, tell what it is they do, how big their staff is, what their budget is, all those things, just general education. And the more you can learn, the better. There's also resources out there. The Towns Association has a ton of training material. Barb's been involved in that, and I encourage you to do that. You can get your town attorney to speak on these topics. Sometimes the county offers training on these topics as well, or you can get speakers in. But we'd encourage you, anytime that board members can interact with staff is a good thing. So if you can do ride-alongs with the police department, ride-alongs with the public works department, go on a tour of the road projects that you have coming up, go on a tour of your police department, public workshop, all of those, spend time with the department heads and get to know them and get to know the challenges that they're going through. And department heads too, I mean, it's a two-way street. So educate. That's one of the biggest jobs, I think, of managers, is to be able to educate and to keep an open mind and understand, when you're done with your tour, the board might not be in lockstep with you, right? But at least they know some of the reasons why, the pressures and things that you have, that you have to deal with. Any questions on that? It seems like a simple thing, but you can implement it. It's free. All right, then we get into some of the meatier ones here. And we left at the point, so you may have resolved or be on the path to resolving some of these issues. But if not, we'll offer our point number 3, which should be on another next slide there, which is to renew employment contracts or adopt an employee handbook or ordinance. So when we were here last, we understood that you had employment contracts with all of your employees, that they expired on December 31st, 2025, that they were still, you're in the process of evaluating those. That at the time we were here, I think it was that day, there was an employee handbook that was circulated to the group. So I'm not sure, have you made any more progress on that since we left, or is that? Okay. Then this is timely then, right? Let's talk about it, because it's very important that you retain your staff. It's very important to your staff to know what their future is. So we'll start out with the premise, and not to make anybody mad, but employment contracts with every employee is very unusual in our experience. I don't know, Chris, if we've not seen that. It doesn't mean that it's bad or illegal or something like that. We think a better practice would be to have a comprehensive employment ordinance or a handbook, and we'll describe some of the reasons for that, and not the contracts. Some of the challenges of contracts are, it's an administrative burden and not the end of the world, but you have to prepare them. They expire. You have to keep on track of that. There can be inconsistency that can develop in those contracts, different terms for different employees, or contracts that were signed at different times, where a manual or ordinance would lock that down. They're rigid commitments, and you're binding the town into multi-year raises when you don't know exactly what the future is going to be like in 3 years. Some of the termination provisions that you have in there impose majority votes that aren't required by state law. So that being said, but you've got those contracts, right? And you've got employees who are counting on what's the future going to bring for them. So they are very reluctant to say, well, let's just tear up the contracts until something else is in place, right? And that's completely understandable. So you've got the employee handbook, and that, like you said, is the way that we would recommend doing it. I like ordinances, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But how you do that handbook, we think, is really important. And so we believe that in order to have something that's going to be effective, that's going to create harmony and less disruption in your organization, that be something that is collaboratively produced. And we just had a recommendation in here that you consider an employee and employer committee or work group, if you want to call it that, maybe two of each, and sit down and start looking at the template. Another danger is just adopting a template, because there are differences. It doesn't work. There's differences between your organization and other organizations, nuances and things like that. And also, when you adopt a template, you have really not much skin in the game. It's like, oh, this came from somebody, I don't know, maybe remember it and follow it. So when you develop it yourself, you're invested in it, and it's more meaningful to you. You might, there's going to be a lot of things you probably agree on, surprisingly, in producing that, because everybody's got to get the work done, right? And but the employees, I think, and your management team will know some of the the pitfalls to avoid and some of the nuances. And board, you're gonna, you've got your perspective on it as well. So now, that may not be something you finish in the next 3 or 4 months. I don't know. You could, but I wouldn't rush that process. So you've got these contracts that are ending. That date is looming, And so you hate to do something hasty and throw together a book that you're gonna live to regret later. So one option might be to extend those employment contracts for a period of time until you can complete that, have a year contract or something, or 6-month contract. But it's important that the successor to the contracts be in place and that, that people have had a voice and input into that. Hey, Chris, any thoughts on that?
Keep going.
That's for non-union employees, correct?
Yes, yeah, you've got a union and that, they get a contract. Any questions on that? It's important to do and at least to, you know, for your employees to see where this is heading and,
And the report has some more details
yeah.
regarding this.
Do you have any
Big picture.
estimated timeline, just experiential from past that, let's say it's a 3-month process, a 6-month process, what would you recommend?
I'll let Chris answer first.
I've been all over the board on those, so, you know, I think you got at least 6 months. I really do. If you're gonna, because you don't meet every day on that, you know, maybe, you need a good start. A template is a good place to start. But yeah, I'd say 6 months would be a reasonable amount. June 1st would be, you know, if you want to have a good date to extend those other contracts for 6 months and then have this done by. I don't think there's that much.
No, I would have
It's gonna be an
said,
issue with it.
yeah, maybe 4 months or 6 to 6. It's a smaller organization,
Yeah.
so it's not, you're not bringing a cast of thousands together, but it's terrible to have to do it with a gun pointed to your temple that you've got to do this by December, you know, and then you got the holidays and that whole thing, so I'd give some, I mean, you could start.
Yeah, I'm just looking for some rough. So,
Yeah.
We're not gonna do it in 2 months, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's
But
right.
we're not gonna take 5 years either. So, that's all I'm trying to do.
4 to 6 months, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
That's helpful.
Any comments on that or thoughts? I mean, we got folks who have contracts and we're not trying to be mean-spirited or anything to you. I think this would move you to a better practice. All right, well, in conjunction with that is our 4th point, which is a classification compensation plan. And so if you are committed to say, look, we are maybe going to extend these employment contracts because we think that project 3, you know, will take that amount of time, you might want to queue this one up too. So what a class comp study is it looks at the different positions in your organization, and it starts with really an interview with employees and with the management team. What is it that you do? What do your employees do? Where's your job description? And then get that, figure out a group of comparable communities, and that is a little bit of an art. Population, geography, sometimes even I've learned the proximity to lakes impacts that. But I would recommend getting a company that would do that. They go out and then develop a pay plan at the end of the day based on what comparable positions make, and you can get as elaborate as you want to. It can have a step system in it, and you don't have to give the steps automatically. Those could be earned, or you can. But that starts to help staff feel like, okay, I know, you know, there's going to, if I stick with this and am successful, there'll be some upward progression for me here. It also gives, you know, the board control over what expenses are going to be, and predictability. So I think it's important it's also important for internal equity, right? So you want to make sure that if I'll use fire chief because you don't have one, right? So if I'm the fire chief of the town of East Troy, I want to know that I'm, you know, in the ballpark of chiefs of similar sized communities. But so that's the external comparability, but it also looks internally at how are your jobs stack up from a education requirement, experience requirement, and to make sure that there's equity within the organization as well. So, important thing to do. I think there's, we do it, not that you'd have to hire us, or we do it relatively cheaply, I think, as compared to other proposals that I've seen, but we can get you a list of vendors, and I think it's that important that you can show, and it's hard to do it on your own, I think. I haven't seen a lot of those be terribly successful, because everybody's got a different idea of who they should be.
I had given Chairman Jones a contact for that previously, but it got pushed aside, so.
I wonder about, in this day and age, could we use AI to do a search and generate results in a certain region of a certain size municipality?
It sure can't hurt. I was just gonna say a funny AI story. I had it do the graphics on my PowerPoint, and I put a little shoot community logo on there, so it's not full of that, but no, you absolutely could. What you want to do is identify, comparable communities, and it probably is not going to crank out your pay schedule, but it could probably get you.
Ranges or?
It's hard to find communities that, because AI will obviously search the internet, correct? And I don't know if there's a lot available. That is public record, well, it's public record, but it's not out there. But it's worth a try.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it.
And I've done some internal when I was.
Yeah, on the clerk's
I
network,
did some of my own stuff,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
for the
On
first
the-
one, it might be easier. You only have 7 employees, whatever,
Right.
that are not contract, so
Right.
it's not a big job.
Yeah, on the clerk's network, we see a lot of salary surveys, but then you have, okay, this person has 3 years of experience and their community is this size, and it's all over the place, all over the place. So it's very hard, I think, doing something like this classification and breaking down the duties of the position would be more equitable than just shooting out and saying every clerk, treasurer, deputy clerk, or whatever out there, because it's all over the place.
Yeah, that's
They are.
and I appreciate you saying that, because that is the danger, and even, in moments of frustration, I would try to do my own, and it's like it's very dangerous to compare apples to, sometimes in police officer, we can say, kind of agree on, unless there's extra duties or things like that, but as you point out, there's, especially in smaller towns where you're wearing 6 different hats, so the clerk here might do something different. Anyway, any other questions on that class comp? I think, I'm sorry.
I worked for the city of Milwaukee for 20 years, and they have a thing down there called VOI, and it lists all the salaries and all the different titles, and it lists the pay ranges that you can look up. So I don't know if that's a possibility to ask AI for VOI and see what it says.
Probably, I just retrieved, I was trying to find some examples, some pay plans and things for you here, just to give you an idea. But I think it would be worth at least putting out, and again, you guys all have to decide this, but if you say, look, let's do the handbook, let's do a class comp study, then I would put out like a request for qualifications, or even an RFP to firms to do that, the class comp study, and you'll probably get anywhere from $8,000 to $60,000.
That was my question, could you give me a range of what the ballpark of doing this classification comp study would be? And does a third party take some of the pressure off, people fighting internally to?
It takes the pressure off everybody but the consultant, yeah. No, you're right, that's a big part of it, is having a third party come in who doesn't have a lot of baggage, who can look at things objectively. I would say, Chris, what would we price something like this for? Probably under 10.
Yeah, under 10, I've seen them up to 30, because they have 8 employees, but, yeah, 7,500 to 15.
I would.
For other firms, too.
Yeah.
That's what the village told me they paid, right around 7,500.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It looks like that's in the report on the bottom of page 7 too.
Yeah, the
I
village
know
was trying
there's some
to-
big firms at the Baker Tilly
Under
and K
10K.
Group, and they'll charge a lot, but I think there's other.
Small firms, they do that.
Do you have any RFP templates that you
I bet we could, because we get them all the time, so I'll.
It just makes it easier.
Yeah, I'll make a note.
Well, we hard on you.
Let's see, actually, I think I'll. Okay, good, I'm glad we're in the same ballpark. So, our fifth suggestion that we had here was to develop a strategic plan. And so this kind of goes back to my original comments where it did not seem to us that there were real specific goals or objectives that were identified certainly at the organizational level. And that flows down to the department level too, because the departments want to base or ideally should base what they're doing off of what the board wants to do. This is not a quick process, and it's one that you have to be committed to do. I know, Chris, you've had more experience with this. What are your...
Several of them. One of the ones I did when I was in Sherwood was the board voted 4-3 on every issue. And at night after the board meeting, 4 went to this bar and 3 went to this bar. I couldn't go. So,
You went to both bars,
so,
probably.
but I really had to go both. But one of the reasons I said that is that I suggested that you get together and talk about your goals and objectives so you can really figure it out. It wasn't pretty, I think just figuring out a night took about a month when they're going to meet. But it was a great process, and they still didn't like each other after it was done. But, they set some goals, and they were all happy about them. And that gave staff a lot of well, I know what we're doing now. I know what this board wants for the town in the long range. So it's very successful, I thought, and we don't do these too often. I think, our firm doesn't. There's a lot of great firms out there, and some of them are very reasonable to do. You have measurable priorities for your staff. You can measure what people are doing their jobs, or how they're doing their jobs, or meeting the goals, not doing their jobs. I think it's one of the best methods to get when two kind of boards change. I've always felt it was very successful, and I was telling the administrators, if they're not a strategic plan, do that. That'll help you get your measures, what you have to accomplish. So I was really strong when we did this. I thought that was a good. It takes a year. No, it's not an easy process. It takes a long time. And I think they run, it depends, 10 to, I don't see them for 80, but 10 to 25,000 is probably for a good strategic plan. And I see, again, we don't do those, but there's a lot of folks.
You might want to, and I've seen, it's difficult even when we get proposals for strategic plans, to have the organization really articulate what it is they want done. I guess my own bias would be maybe get a request for qualifications, which would just be asking a consultant how they would approach the strategic plan. I've been in some ridiculous ones, where you get the little sticky thing and put it on the thing that means the most to you, and then at the end they take the butcher paper down and that's your strategic plan, and that's not terribly useful. But there's others that get so far in the weeds that you don't even complete it. So
we can send a copy of someone else's plan.
Yeah.
I think Tom Roman has one that I thought was pretty good. So I can send a couple. So you can look at it.
That'd be great.
And you might not, we're just hitting everything that we thought of. You might not do all this next year, right? Because we understand you got a budget, but at least it gets things started.
Will there be like a list of firms that are suggested?
Sure, we can come up with some names. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, so my next slide was, and that's a little bit of a longer topic here, improve financial procedures. So, we'd start with everything in here is things that we see in other communities, so there's nothing bad going on here, and your money's accounted for. But there are some practices that we think could make your organization stronger. So we'll start out with fund balance. We would recommend that you have either an ordinance or probably, I would say an ordinance, and I'll pause here and I'll tell my big bias for ordinances. And the code company was happy when I was in charge because we spend a fair amount of money updating our code. And so people would say, well, why do you do that? That's a waste. Why not we could do it in-house, type it up. You'll be doing all this over again, or another board will be doing it. It's like Groundhog Day. If you don't codify this stuff, write it down, have it in a place that doesn't change, that has a procedure for changing it, that's available to everybody, you're going to end up like every other organization that I've been at, where I think I can buy something up to $3,000, but if it's a brake job, then I got to go to the board, and it's this massive like memory game of what the rule book was, and so not just for financial procedures, and I'm not picking on the staff or board members at all. This is just very common, and so I'm a big believer that you would take your Chapter 11, I think, which it is. It's reserved right now, and you start a financial ordinance. And, you know, we had done that as a county. We had one ordinance, you know, and today there's probably 50. I don't know that that's a measure of success, having more laws, but it sure brought things under, you know, it made it manageable real quickly. And I liked it for the protection of me and for the protection of staff, particularly when you get into purchasing and other financial procedures. I don't want to have to guess what authority I have to buy something. You know, I don't want you to come back later and say, brother, what did you do? You know, you didn't have authority to do that. So that's why I'm a big proponent of those ordinances, and I'll keep coming back to that. But the first one was a fund balance ordinance, and we think that you would benefit from having that. And Chris, 15% generally.
Well, the auditors usually have 15 to 20. So, you know, I think you're not far below it. But it's hard to get a fund balance, especially if your tax levy status is really tight, you know, where it's hard to, so it's not an easy thing to do. You have to really work at it. I used to do it, people thought it was crazy, but we used to give, part of the review process of our department heads was, well, okay, we know what your budget is, but, you know, we really want you to get 2% access in your budget, work hard. And, you know, that was part of their goals, to save money during the year. You know, we budgeted, not that we budgeted loosely, because we didn't, believe me, but it was a goal. How can you save money to get us some extra cash to build that reserve up? It's kind of guerrilla tactics in order to do it. It's very difficult.
But it is amazing over time, and, you know, that's the other piece of this, and so many governments suffer because if it can't be solved in 18 months or 6 months, then they don't do it. And that's a long-term project that Chris is talking about, and I always liken it to, you know, take whatever, find the money in the couch cushions, wherever you can get it. And it's amazing when you set it as a goal, in a short amount of time, you can actually build something if you put your mind to it. And so having, you know, it was interesting because when I started, the taxpayer groups were angry if you had a large fund balance, right? Because, well, you shouldn't be taxing you then. But later we found out it was pretty cool because we didn't have to borrow any money ever, you know, and so we saved interest. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility. It's prudent, conservative financial management to have a decent fund balance.
I did go to Wisconsin Towns Association on this, and they did say that, like, what's written out there, what's official is 15%, but they recommended going to a CPA, so I happened to be across the table from a CPA, and he goes, it really depends on your business, but it could be as much as 100%. So it really needs to be sized for your operation, and so we'll just have to, I guess, talk about it.
That ain't gonna happen.
Your auditors and, you know, your own comfort level, I think, is, you know, a big part of it, whether you're conservative. I liked having money on hand because it gave you a lot of flexibility to save money.
We usually have an audit comment about our fund balance, and we're like at 19 or 10%. So, and she always mentioned that it's a little low, but we're okay, because as a government, we're not here to make a profit. We're here to maintain our services, so.
Right,
But
but if
when
we
you're-
could save money on interest, that would be awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
Like
that's
all
all
other
there's
and
on
our
my show at my
and our
house.
interest goes into our general fund to
I mean,
cover
that's
expenses.
good conservative,
So,
like you said, financially.
I mean, and we
I
do
mean,
quite
that's-
well with interest, we do, but it goes.
We
into
spend a
our
lot of
general-
money in interest, Ms. Buchanan.
Yes.
Every year.
Spend it. All of our borrowing.
Waste a lot of money in interest every year.
Yes.
Oh, with our borrowing?
Borrowing,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, then how
Yeah.
are we gonna pay for that fire truck next year?
Well, that's what we're working on.
That's-
Okay, we're not,
That's the idea.
Yeah.
that's part of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the candor, and it's, yeah, it has to be a long-term goal, constant goal. You can do amazing things in time with the goal. So,
Well, in business, you always hear that, like, in government, if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's always like, well, we're not gonna be like government, just because we have the money, we're gonna spend it. And so I think it's just that difference in order to save the money and set it aside, yeah. Identify projects for the money as you save it, you know, have those kind of goals. On the business side, it's more goals about saving as opposed to maximizing the budget spending.
all right, our second suggestion here in financial procedures was fund accounting, and we currently utilize separate funds for debt service and landfill. Capital funds are accounted for in the general fund. I think Chris had taken a deep dive here, but you're suggesting a separate capital.
Well, it does go through the sort of, council would know that, but,
I'm sorry, I have a hard time hearing you, Chris.
oh, me too.
I don't know if you can use
Me
the
too.
mic with, share it with Dave or what.
Sure, I'll speak on it.
And Michelle could move up to her mic, it's really hard to
I
hear
think
you.
there's not a segregated capital fund. with-
And our auditors never suggested for me to have one.
Right, and I did talk to your auditor briefly, who I know very well. She worked with me many years. In one of your capital fund, it has to have a revenue stream in order to make GFOA standards. You have to have a revenue stream for it. So the point was trying to create, it's very difficult with tax levy limits these days. Back when I was more active, we actually levied to the capital fund, and then you had interest income and, you know, borrowing and other things. And it was a way that you could maintain, you know, a fund balance for capital projects as well. And it was, and segregate your funds so that it mixed with the operating. And it's a very simple thing, but it's hard to fund that independently if you don't have levy dollars, as you know, right? So figuring out how to do that is maybe difficult, but I think your auditor is really, I think she could help you do that and figure out how to get that capital fund going. I think it's a simple thing, but I think it'll help the board, helps transparency and all those good things, so.
You talked twice about a revenue stream. What exactly are you referring to and how does that become developed?
Well, funds, a fund, in order to be a real independent fund, like your debt service fund is, or your landfill fund, which has interest revenue. So you have to have a source of revenue. You can't just create a fund that doesn't have any revenue. So you have to have revenues and expenditures. So a revenue stream could be from tax levy. It has debt proceeds from it every year, or not every year, I don't know if you borrow every year, but, you know, every 2 years. It has interest income, create some interest income, and impact fees can go in there. So there are several.
Utility
revenue
fees.
streams. Huh?
Utility fees if you did like
If you did-
this,
if you did
stormwater.
that. So you could, it has to have a revenue stream, and that's the tricky part. The levy part's the tricky part. Because then you can levy for capital projects rather than borrow for them. But because of the tight levy limits, It's very difficult these days. It's not as easy as it used to be. But, so does that answer your question, what a revenue stream is? Maybe I did. It's a, sort of.
So,
Dave?
I'm perceiving this to be things that we can create charges for that get passed on to the taxpayers,
That
correct?
wasn't my intent. no.
well, you can actually use levy dollars and put it in as your revenue stream, so you could tax, it's just a way of keeping track of the fund and being able to track the
It's
purchases
just tracking.
and savings and so.
And they'll have its own fund balance at the end, so you can make.
Carry it
In theory,
forward.
you can create and save for future purchases as well, rather than borrow for and save. So it's not about charging fees at all. I wouldn't do that.
Any other issues on that?
This one's a big deal for me. It's probably one of the main reasons why I ran for office. What we do, 10 years ago, we were borrowing $200,000. This last budget was $2.2 million. I know we didn't go there, but the point is, the borrowing has gone out of sight. And even Ellers, in one of their reports on the fire district, basically, it was saying you can't borrow your way through supporting that fire district. And so I know the village does it. I know a lot of places are able to do a capital fund. We just got to find a way to do it. I think that's it.
It doesn't really solve that problem, borrowing, because borrowing is because of levy limits.
Sure.
It just helps, it creates maybe a mechanism to help that in the future, but there's no panacea, is that the right word for
Yeah,
not
that's-
borrowing?
Well-
It's hard.
Dave, you took Walter County from debt to out of debt. That happens with hard work. It doesn't happen through a lot of borrowing. So I think it's just a disciplined approach that we gotta
Yeah, it's
get our arms around.
all about setting the goal, and I mean, I don't want to harp on old county stories, but yeah, we were in debt up to our eyeballs, and we had a $23 million OPEB liability, and so it was just, the first year we did that, we had, the one was $23 million, we put $300,000 into a lockbox, right? It's like, you're crazy, you're never gonna pay that off. We paid it off in like 3 years. People are motivated, staff is motivated, they can see that. Nobody likes their mortgage at home or their, whatever, their MasterCard debt. Everybody wants to, you wanna pay that off, right? So you set that as a goal, and you understand that, money's tight too, so you're not gonna, shut the doors to town hall. But if you set it as a priority, and even if you fund it with $10 in year one, you will, you'll get to a better place with that. Our next point in terms of finances were direct and indirect expense allocation. And so what this is really talking about is the overhead, if you will, the cost of one department supporting another department, for example. And this is also can be a little bit controversial because it's bookkeeping, right? And so you'd say, it's just a lot of bookkeeping because it's just, we get money in, we pay the money out. But there's advantages to doing some of those calculations when you're drawing down grant revenue, particularly to be able to do a full cost accounting of a program. The other thing is that you may find that one department is subsidizing another department, and that might be okay, but it's better to make sure that you've got, you know what each program is costing you. So, Chris?
It's not as big here because you don't have a lot of departments, but, there is some room for improvements, and I think the one I find, I don't know if it's here, liability and unemployment in all those churches, in a lot of communities, they budget just in the general fund. Now, here, I don't know, just in the general government, they just put the clerk's budget usually. And, I'm sure you go on the police, so you know how much police, and I don't remember.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I don't remember, I'm sorry.
Oh, why don't you stand?
Sure. I was just saying, in East Troy here, you're small, but I've seen in a lot of communities, where the liability in the workers' comp insurance, for example, goes to the clerk's office. It's not allocated to police, or it's not allocated to public works. I don't think that's the case here, but that's just an example of, trying to get it. The health insurance sometimes is in general government, and it's not allocated. So just to look at those things, I find it's a better cost accounting.
Yeah, well, in our health insurance, life insurance, that is all allocated to departments. The general liability workers' comp is just overall. We don't have it broken down between departments.
Yeah, and it helps you understand how much the other departments are costing you, because like police, fed for police, but, police is the highest, versus yours, which is, 0.25 per $100.
She had a hangnail, it was horrible.
But yeah, it's it's just a thing you need to look for in your budget. A little detail, I look at little details, so that's what
And financial controls was our next topic in terms of improving financial procedures. And that, again, there's nothing earth-shattering here. Like a lot of small municipalities, you'll get some comments from the auditors here. Chris, you had talked to them. I think it's more a matter of maybe just having a process to outbrief with the auditors and maybe taking some of the financial controls and putting it in that chapter I talked about. And there's limits to what you can do, because in terms of division of duties and things like that, because there's only so many of you, but taking those to heart, I think, is our recommendation. We had engaged the services of a financial consultant, so
Did you have an annual budget?
I got the annual budget coming up here.
Okay, I must have stapled these wrong. I didn't use your second slide.
Financial controls, financial planning. Here we go, it's number 7. Okay, so, financial consultant, there's consultants out there that can work with you, and it's another resource. I know we had one that I heard so long ago, I forgot what they even charge. Chris, what would you expect them to pay for somebody, or how would you go about picking?
Financial consultant?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned hours, for example. They charge about $250 an hour. So that's all they do from an hourly rate. But if they're going to come in and analyze your debt, they'll do that for free, obviously, but they make their money when they borrow from you. So that's how most and 90% of the communities have financial advisors. They just don't borrow from the bank. There are some communities who just borrow from the bank. A financial advisor will help you, I think, borrow more smartly. They'll give you, they give you the big picture. They help you on your big picture budgeting. They help you on your levy limit worksheet, how you can maximize that. So it depends. Some things are hourly rates, and some are, they charge you as part of the borrowing, as Bayer and Ellers and all those. But they may save you money too, by consolidating your debt, or paying off some of the higher interest debt. So they look at all of that. You're not as complicated, but I think you might, worth giving a call to an Ellers or a Baird and have them look at it. I really do.
Yeah, especially if you have outstanding debt now, they can provide you with some options. I was always, because I didn't like to borrow, so I was always real skeptical, because they get paid by having you borrow money, so I always kept kind of an arm's length relationship with them, because the answer was sometimes, or oftentimes borrowing. But I think, again, you could do like an RFQ or something as well, and just test the waters. There's places out there, and if you have debt, if you're going to be borrowing, I mean, Baird did really well with them. They were great to work with until we got out of debt. They helped us get out of debt.
And
So.
then there's Ellers and some of the Baird will help you with your daily stuff, but a firm like Ellers or PMA, they'll actually help you look at your levy limit worksheet to see if there's any, and I'm using that as an example. I've always had Ellers look at my levy limit worksheet to make sure that I do it, I draft it, not just an annual thing. How does what I put in my levy limit worksheet this year helps 2 years from now? So, as an example. So there's a lot of things in financial advisory, even if it's a one-time review of all your stuff, that's all you need. And they may say, hey, you're fine, but I think it's a really important point.
Agreed. All right, financial planning was our next advice here. The town should consider a longer-term financial plan that extends beyond the annual budget, encompassing both capital and operational expenditures. So some ideas here were establishment of a pavement management plan with at least a 5-year time horizon, establishment of a capital equipment replacement plan. You've got a good outline, but extend it to 5 years to match the length of other recommended capital plans. Stormwater management plan, those are high-ticket items that you definitely want to plan out well in advance. You've got space that you recently redid, whether you want to do anything different with this space are all things that would require good financial planning, and it helps you balance the peaks and valleys here, so you're not, the levy, and establishes a priority of the projects. The other thing that I really liked with the long-term capital plan, or even a 5-year capital plan as the administrator, was there ought not be any surprises on the plan. Once in a while it happens, but if you're coming in for a current budget year and the department wants to buy a new fire engine for $1 million, my first question is, where was that on your capital plan, right? It should be something like that. You need to know 5 years, you need to know 10 years in advance, right? So it helps, it keeps everybody honest and helps people, think about not just this guy. It drives me nuts that everyone was focused on this next current budget year, and I could struggle to get people, look at the capital plan, we're gonna buy this $30 million building, aren't you interested in that? Look, you start that even in a small way, and I think it'll pay dividends for you.
Well, it also helps you plan your debt and maximize other revenue sources, but also helps smooth out your debt and interest payments. So, yeah, it's a key thing. And you have some shreds, some outlines of capital plans already for roads and equipment. It's just tying that all together is what you need to sort of.
And then I just had a generic purchasing procedure here as our last, and that just kind of closes the loop with that chapter, whatever chapter of your code. I'd be a firm believer in establishing that. I think purchasing is a big area that I like to nail down in the code for everybody's protection. I won't beat a dead horse because I used that example before, but typically these purchasing ordinances, and you've got, people could articulate generally the same version of this, but I think you should incorporate it in your code of ordinances. Is who's got, at what authority can purchases be made? Oftentimes it's a dollar amount. A department head can use $3,000, $5,000, $100, whatever it is. You establish that authority, and also how things are purchased, probably more important. Are competitive quotes or bids required? What does it mean to get bids? Those are all, all things that can be defined in a purchasing ordinance. I included in the appendix some ideas of just example ordinances that just a couple of other cities. I think I had Glendale and Baraboo in here, but it just gives you a flavor of what you can have in a purchasing ordinance. And again, I've never seen an organization that hasn't codified it. I've never seen people remember what the rules are. So I'd encourage you to at least start there, and that can be a collaborative session at the board with what are your current practices, what would the departments like to do. People were angry at me because sometimes I'd set too low of a limit, or I didn't revisit it for a while. So hey, trouble, it's not, 2020 now, you should raise the dollar limit. So just, it's important that everybody's on the same sheet of music, because I think I've seen more misunderstandings on this particular topic than any other financial issue. And it's, who gave that department head the authority to buy that? Why didn't they get better quotes? Why did they go to Joe's Garage instead of Sam's Garage? Why, all of those things, and it just creates, they went there because they're getting a deal on their own oil change. It sets up this wild speculation where you just set a process and do it that way, and then understand, nobody wants to pay money for repairs and things like that, but it's, do it in the most cost-effective way. Chris, anything on that? Oh, any thoughts on that? All right. Then we had improve your annual budget document. And so this, again, it isn't the criticism of you, but it's something that I think can be extremely divisive, the annual budget. Much of the division is based on just a lack of education or misunderstanding as to what's in the budget. And so the point is to try to make this simpler to everybody involved, and simpler to the public so they understand, and also to supervisors and to your management team. Not everybody digs spreadsheets, and that's what most small municipal budgets are. Page after page of spreadsheets and general ledger numbers. And unless you're an accountant yourself, you kind of glaze over and you say, wow, $6 million is a lot of money. Where in the heck is all this money going? So I included in the back, this is something I really feel passionate about. It's the last, it's 18 pages of your packet here. But this is a letter that I had prepared, a transmittal letter, when I was working down in Salem Lakes, and this was a community that had many parallels with you, and so it wasn't just new board members who didn't understand their budget, it was everybody who didn't understand it, and I didn't understand it when I got there. So what I did is, we were preparing this budget, is just, I'm gonna start a simple memo that tells everybody what the heck this is, and I'm gonna start with the very first entry, on the spreadsheet. And we're going to talk about it. And so this isn't, you can do better than this. This was done in the context of a single budget year while I was putting the budget together. But the beauty of it is that you can build on this template year after year. When I did the county's first transmittal letter, it was 2 pages. It was 2001, and I was terrified because it was the first budget I did. But we built on that every year, and it became a GFO accredited budget, which is what a goal that you should aspire to. So, if you just page through this letter, at the beginning, it just tells you, okay, this is what we're going to levy, and this is what we levied last year. And so you can compare it, and you go into talk about the themes of the budget. I think every budget should have a theme to it. What is it that went into the design of this? What were you hoping to accomplish? To retain staff, to develop a new building, or whatever it is? What were some of the major themes? And that's usually, what changed from last year. And then, as you page through, I literally started with, general fund, Fund 10, and said what it is, the amount, what it was last year, and what it is. So, when you see cable television, it's not necessarily intuitive what that is, right? It's a revenue of $80,000, and then it just tells you here. So it's Village had a franchise agreement, so that's the monies that we get. And so every cell of the spreadsheet was populated with an explanation.
This is fantastic, but verbal communication is also important.
Verbal's
And we
always
don't
good.
have that here.
Verbal's good. But the beauty of this is I had a lot of people breathing down my back that, your budget is too expensive, and I take that personally. So this helped. Not everybody agreed with everything that was in here, but it settled people down. Board members who have been on for 6-8 years said, I finally, I understand this. So anyway, just...
It's not gonna happen overnight.
It will
So
not.
you know that. But it's a goal, one of those goals that you start slow and you build every year.
And
Yeah.
with this, you can refer back to it, and as opposed to like just the verbal or the smart sheet or spreadsheet. I can build on it every year, right?
That's what they said.
reference documents.
And, you know, the GFO budget, I put in the appendix some examples of that, and they're beautiful works of art. I don't know, you know, it takes staff and a long time to get there, but you can, if that isn't your, you know, your goal, you can at least incorporate a lot of the guidance that they provide and make it understandable. All right.
Do you have a template?
Pardon?
Do you have a template?
Oh, for that,
Yeah.
I'll send you that one.
Yeah, this
That'd
is
be
great.
awesome.
Sure.
I was gonna ask you, how hard would this be to do it for us?
Yeah.
No, I'd
I
be
mean, it
happy
would
to-
take time, but if I had a template,
It'd
could work
be a
into
lot
it.
easier. I like
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and even if you get through one of them this year, you'll get through more, but hit the save button, bring it out next August, and guess what? All of a sudden, you got something.
Yeah, little by little.
Yeah, it looks really good.
So, the next one was just improve your meeting procedures, and, you have a pretty robust set of board rules, which is far more than you see for many cities. So that's a good thing. I think there's some things though that, and you may have some more ideas here. We just were kind of taking what we were hearing and then also looking at your rule book. Again, I can't emphasize enough that amend ordinances, codify your amendments. And I know that in their interview with Chair Jones, he had indicated that you know, the idea of reading, of having to recite the ordinance, you know, an ordinance creating chapter 62 of the code and reading the whole thing. So I think he had shared that, well, you dispense with that at a meeting, and it's perfectly fine. There's no legal requirement that you have to be the town crier or whatever, and that was always one of my pet peeves, because it seemed like we paid a guy who just read stuff out loud at meetings, right? And I wanted that job. So you don't have to do it, but when you make the decision, you know what, we can dispense with that reading. Put it in your code of ordinances. We had it in ours, which said that, you know, unless any member objects, the reading by the clerk of the title will satisfy the reading, whatever it is. But don't leave yourself like, well, did we decide to do that or not? And it's a small example, but fix stuff and improve it as you go along. So I thought you had, you know, the idea of turning people into, board members into parliamentarians is not where we're going. The rule should serve you, not, you know, vice versa. But there were some, you know, agenda preparation is always a pressure point in every organization, right? And so I'm not sure if you've completely resolved that yet, but you've got some code sections that can be read differently, right? And so I think figure out what it is. You know, so right now you say, okay, the chairperson and the clerk put the agenda together, approve the agenda, right? But any board member can place an item on the agenda. It raises the question of if that process is working for you, great. If not, it was a big issue for us at the county, and so we just made very transparent, clear rules, and that was anybody could put anything on the agenda. It didn't mean the board had to deal with it or listen to it, but every piece of correspondence was referred to the board and announced. A letter from Chris Swords objecting to his tax, you know, letter from Doug Jones, whatever, and it would be received by the board and then referred either to a committee or dealt with by the board or placed on file, which means that the board didn't want to deal with it. So we allowed pretty much everything into the agenda with timetables and things. I don't know if that's an issue. You know, it's always good to have deadlines and things as to when that has to be submitted. So if those are pressure points for you at all, we just suggest that you know, have a night and talk about it, and just, you're not maybe always going to agree on everything, but set the rules out and codify them. The approval of the agenda, that's what, you know, for example, if you were to have this open agenda process where you'd say any supervisor, anybody can put, we always had supervisors, I guess had the sponsor, but then, you know, during that period, when you say approval of the agenda, we'd have people who would take items off the agenda, and a majority vote would say we're not going to talk about it tonight because we've talked about it already, or we have other things to do. So it doesn't mean that you're, at least in Dave Brettle's mind, you have to be a captive audience, but you should, at least I think, have a very clear process and not have to put a person in a position to say, no, I don't, I'm gonna veto your item. Any thoughts on that, or is that going reasonably well? Want to talk about it now, or?
I mean, we could. That hasn't been going very well. And I think we spent 4 months dealing with this, trying to get the ordinance updated properly. My opinion is we should, anybody can put something on, but then between the clerk, we also have the clerk, myself, and the attorney look at it. So between the three of us, we approve it. My personal view is it's less embarrassing, less time consuming for people if they're gonna come in and present to know up front, rather than come to the meeting prepared and then we eject it by a majority vote. But I mean, if that's where we wanna go with it, that's fine with me. But yeah, we're still sort of struggling with that.
No, it's not unique to this organization. It's I had a place I worked, the city administrator claimed control over the agenda. And literally, one of the aldermen wanted to fire him, and he said he wouldn't put it on the agenda. So he would control, and that is a true story. So he, the person who controls the agenda, it's really important. I tended to like, rather than have to get into content, and your point is very well taken, Chair, which is it's terrible to be invited and then to sit there and then have the board say, well, you can't even speak, because then I've just wasted my whole evening. I've done that already. I had one place that a board member invited me to talk about, well, we need to have county administrators, and the board chair didn't want it, so he said, you've got 1 minute. That was, and I had traveled to go there. So, sometimes, hopefully in time you get a sense of, or you can even communicate with each other, but if you're not at that point, just my own bias, I think it's very difficult to put one person in the position of saying, I'm not going to allow you on the agenda. If you get the triumvirate, 3 people to agree, that's difficult too,
How do you do that and not have a walking forum before a meeting?
Well, you can talk to one other supervisor, right? So, and you can talk to your chair if that's, and just bounce it off of him, what would you do if, and sometimes people, there's disagreement about that, and they want to make a point. We had that happen with some frequency where a supervisor would put an item on the agenda. We had maybe talked about it 4 other times, and someone would say, we've done this, we're not going to talk about it tonight, and move on. But my own bias is to cast a wider net, put marketplace of ideas, but that doesn't mean that you have to all listen to it.
Are you talking about who can be on the agenda from the audience, or are you talking about what can be on?
Just topics in general.
Oh, because topics in general, in many places that I've worked had a rule that you couldn't have anything on the agenda unless there was a full report and recommendation or a full report. So if you kind of discipline people, if they want it on the agenda, you got to work at it. You can't just simply put something on the agenda. You have to say why it's on the agenda, here's what action I want, and the board will go, very good, let's, we can act on it. But if they don't do that, they can say, well, next week, if you have a report on it, what are you asking for? What is your request? And then we'll consider it. And that's one way to discipline what goes on. You can't just randomly break things up, because that doesn't help anybody. How are you going to make a decision if, it helps.
Yeah, that is a good idea, and ideally every item on an agenda should have some type of explanation with it, right? Whether it's a short memo or, so you can start creating some of those.
And the conflict we had here was that was being done, but still denied being put on the agenda.
Okay, if we want to have that discussion right here,
Well,
It wasn't done. I was supposed to see a memo with that agenda for approval, okay? I never saw the memo, never showed up until I denied it 3 times, and then the attorney agreed with me. So I really prefer not having the public display of all this, but if that's what you want, we can do it.
well, and
I'm here, I can discuss it. Everybody should know what's going on. It's difficult.
It is hard, I mean, I never had to be in that position, but, I don't know, Chris, I like your idea, coming in with a memo,
We used to not have to have anything, I don't believe. We could just put it on the agenda and then it was
Right.
decided whether or not it would be on there.
Well, the best
Or,
practice.
and then a lot of times we wouldn't know what was gonna be on the agenda before,
Right?
until Friday
Yeah,
or Saturday.
it was one or the other, yeah. It's kind of a guessing game, is it gonna be on?
I think
Or isn't
we're
it gonna be
working-
on? Or if it's on, you don't have it.
I feel like we're working towards a better place, with having that memo or that report or whatever, when somebody does wanna put something on the agenda.
how about an agenda-setting meeting? It's extra meetings.
I think we have enough meetings, Mr. Brown.
It was probably the most important thing we did at the county, because we sat down and said, what's gonna be on the agenda, and added out. I mean, it helps to have people together to talk.
Well,
Did the board
doesn't
participate in
the
that
chair,
meeting?
Sure.
doesn't the chairman and the clerk and the attorney have that meeting now?
we do not, we email, that's not
Oh.
meeting.
Oh, I thought you guys came together on Friday.
No.
Okay.
That would be,
Conversation would be huge.
yeah, that would be, and again, it's other people's time that I'm donating here, but there is a difference. Doing that agenda-setting meeting, I think, in person is really important, or even on Zoom or something like that. It was basically, the whole board would show up, it was committees that we did, but we would talk through each item, and sometimes, why is this on? And oftentimes, it could be talked out right there. It was noticed, the meetings were agendized, nobody attended because they weren't interested, because we weren't talking about the substance of it. But that would be a tangible thing that you could try for a month, is just, let's get together. I'm not suggesting the whole board has to get together to do it, although you could, because what you're gonna talk about is important. Or have that group of 3, that would be fine, the attorney, the clerk, and your board chair, and just sit down and hopefully, reason and talk through things.
How does that differ than committee of the whole?
Well, committee of the whole would be your whole town board, right?
Right.
Usually.
But I understand the committee of the whole has less restrictive, it allows for greater discussion among the board members.
Yeah, generally, legally, there's not a difference, but committee of the whole is typically done when you want to have more of an informal workshop kind of discussion. Oftentimes, it's even chaired by somebody else in the city, at least our council president would chair it, and the mayor would sit down. So you can do that. Committee of the whole would be great to talk about this agenda process, for example, or other.
Committee of the whole, excuse me, I just did 3.5 months in Summers as their interim administrator. It was my first experience with Committee of the Whole. And it worked really well. They had you had 4 meetings a month, unfortunately, but the first one was Committee of the Whole workshop. The whole items were on there, and they would decide if they wanted to go put the stuff on the next board meeting. Once they did, we put it on the board, everyone had talked it over pretty much, and so the board meetings were only like 20 minutes. The Committee of the Wholes were 2 or 3 hours. But it gave a lot of room to talk about before it went to the full board. And all the members had not all of them, but it had a kind of consensus that these items should go to the Committee of the Whole. So,
Or to the whole.
to the whole board. So it was kind of it wasn't meeting about the agenda, but it was substance, not just the agenda.
So,
Item.
so in this meeting, so you're allowed to talk? So what you're saying is instead of showing up at a board meeting and not knowing where everyone's at or what everyone's talking about, you're allowed to discuss all this more informally? And then,
You don't make a decision. You
No.
go ahead and consensus to move it on to the full board. Even though the full board's committee of the whole.
Some places will have committees do that function, right? And I don't know how active your committees are out. But for example, you can almost populate your board agenda automatically if you require everything to come out of the committee of the whole or committee to, as far as ordinance and resolution, those become like automatic, and then, you've got correspondence and things. So that committee of the whole, though, you would, typically either run through the whole action items, like, and then get consensus, talk about it, speeds up your board meeting. You can ask, it's more informal, kind of give and take discussion, I think, generally speaking, so. Joe, I cut you off.
I was told by the Wisconsin Towns Association that the towns do not do committees of the whole because they have committees. They have the ability to do committees. More like villages, cities, larger municipalities do that. So I was maybe misled on that.
No, I think you could do it. I have a problem with committees and very small boards because it's like, why are we, that was Williams Bay. Everybody sat there for their committee meetings and called and adjourned, and you had all these committee chairs and everything. And this was very cumbersome, extra sets of minutes and everything like that. But no, there's no reason why you couldn't do a committee of the whole. We often, it could even be for that training thing if you didn't want to incorporate it. Usually, or oftentimes it's more of a focused discussion for a longer period of time on a topic. So, but you can use it however you like.
What constitutes conducting business? Because that's a big deal, because we talk about walking quorums by having interactions in emails and different things.
Sure.
So what is that detail for what clarifies?
Well, you're noticed as a regular meeting,
Noticed
so
meeting.
you could, it's got to be a regular, open, public meeting with topics that you're going to talk about. I would say the difference is you typically don't vote at the end of the committee of the whole. It's, you kind of let it sit and then you take it up at the board.
I see. But it isn't open, it's basically a board meeting without
Correct.
voting.
Yeah, exactly. With
Okay.
just, yep. So I guess maybe I'm leaving it. I appreciate everybody sharing their thoughts on this, and I didn't mean, I would bet if you did that agenda setting meeting in person next month, it's going to make a big difference. I'll just say that because I was part of one of those.
Definitely.
Let's see.
Definitely.
Some of the other things to think about, and this may not be a huge issue for you, for public comment, my bias was if it isn't an agendized item, to put that on at the end. So we had actually 2 public comment periods. One was for items appearing on the agenda. So if somebody's coming up and they've got their rezone or something like that, then you let them obviously make their pitch before they vote. But for non-agendized items, the problem was that we were, depending on the night, you could push your business meeting off for 2 hours or something like that. So get your business done first, right? And then it's not that you're not interested and you'll listen to them, but you need to be sharp and have your focus on what you want to do first, I think. So anyway, that's small.
We previously had 2 public comments, but it was just both noticed as public comments, and it was just people talking about the same things in both.
Yep.
So it was just making it that much longer, and they were given 3 minutes or 4 minutes? 3 minutes at each?
Per time period, yeah.
So then it was just rehashing the same thing before and after the agenda, yeah.
Redundancy.
So we have to set it on the agenda, that this is for
Yeah.
agenda-oriented things first, and then anybody can speak after.
Yep. And it worked out well.
And it was a double-edged sword, because when we chose to put the public comments at the beginning of the meeting versus the end of the meeting, you're either speaking about things upcoming on the agenda, or you're speaking after things have been approved, for instance, if you only have one public comment period. But with that said, many school districts limit the time frame for public comments. People sign up when they come into the meeting, and there's 30 minutes for public comment. You may or may not get to speak if someone has taken their full amount of time. If someone's taken less, we can get that many more people speaking. So that's something else that we've talked about in the office, is setting a actual time frame of 30 minutes or something such as that. But I think that's something for the board to discuss.
My only problem with that is when you had the first 28 minutes were with speakers who wanted to legalize pot, you know, and it's like, we can't do that, sorry. to let
Well,
you
they
know.
probably won't get here first and sign up first.
But, you know, that was, but to your point, you can time limit, I mean, that's appropriate. It's hard when it's a group and, you know, maybe if you do 2 minutes per speaker or something like that. But
Right.
if you have those, they need to be enforced, because, you know, you can't, once you start fudging, so they
stick with
gotta
the
be
timer.
enforced. And we just ended up, over time, it used to be, you know, people would come to these meetings real focused, and in the last few years, it was like, man, I mean, you're talking about stuff that we can't even do anything about, you know? And I just really resented having everybody sit there and
Well, I would say in our community, they're very focused on what they want to talk about.
Well, that can be good or bad.
Was your, when you had the public comment, did you have, because most communities, the chair, the president, the mayor, they do not allow the interaction. So if you have a citizen speaking,
No interaction.
you don't talk.
Yeah,
Not
we're not allowed to,
Good, okay, because
That happens, but
that's
it's not
what,
supposed to.
I've been in a community that we had to change that because it was a dialogue and an argument, so you split that off, that's great, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, public comment can be such and beyond the scope of this, but it can get people more riled up, because they go there, they've got something very bad that happened to them, and then they say, what are you gonna do about it? Well, I can't talk, you know. Can't answer you. You know, so I've also, you know, encouraged people to put their in writing, or, you know, so we can get it on an agenda, or sometimes you can say we'll put it on next month's agenda. But if you do that, you know, consider that if you're doing okay, time limiting speakers is perfectly fine. Once per speaker is more than enough sometimes. You can have a rule like that. You can have people fill out a card when they come in, so you know whether it's an agendized or not an agendized item. All those things I think can, you know, you're all, you know, giving up your evenings and time, so make sure you get your business done first, I guess is all I'm saying. All right, 9 is, I see that, we'll try to speed up here a little bit, but 9 is consider your optional programs and services. And so I'll say this right now, and it'll step on everybody's toes and hurt the chief's feelings. No, it won't, because what I'm gonna say is just decide what it is that you want to do, right? So we had, when I started at the county, we had 3 sacred cows, they called it. It was the farm, literally cows, and then there was a nursing home and a special school. And those were just, it was like an albatross, because they were optional programs and people were just tormented. It's like, well, we're spending too much money on this, we shouldn't have it. And so finally, with each one, we had it out, and we didn't have a farm, we ended up having a nursing home, and we ended up having a special needs school, right? So, but when we taught, it was so healthy when we finished that discussion, because we knew what we were going to do, and we weren't constantly picking at this thing to say, well, we should really not do this. So you have 2 big optional programs here in the town, right? You got the police department, and you've got your courts, I think, as we see it. We think they're both well run. Don't see any problems there. Your courts were separation of powers was being followed. You've got a great venue for that. Your police department, we think, is certainly not overstaffed by any means, and I think is probably minimally staffed in order to provide the 24-hour protection that they do. But my point and our point with this is just don't let mystery surround this. Talk about it and decide what it is that you want to do, right? So there are alternatives to each of those. If you decide you're not obliged to have a police department. You can contract with a different city or contract with the county, but there's ramifications to those decisions, because you're not, at the end of the day, gonna get the same level of service that you have now. And those contracts can go up with prices that are beyond your control. With courts, the county will hear your cases. There's a procedure for doing that, and I had laid that out in the report. You're about a year, I think, away from making that decision. Your court brings revenue for you, which is great. If you tried your cases at the county, they give you revenue too. They charge you $5 for a case. Defendants have to pay more, and it's less convenient for them to do it. Sometimes the dispositions aren't as tailored to what you would like locally. But I just encourage you to have a dialogue about those programs, especially if, you know, if finances and taxes and those things are of interest to people. It's a healthy discussion to have, and at the end of the day, if you decide this is what your community wants to have, then support that and be okay with it. Is that?
And Dave and I talked to us, we even put this in here because the board spoke so highly of the police and the courts that, and they didn't want anything to do with getting rid of them. But we thought we'd be remiss if we didn't at least put it in here. Every consultant's report should have that.
Thank you for saying that.
So,
Maybe I won't get a parking ticket.
You primarily referred to like the option of going to the sheriff's department. At one time, there was a very controversial discussion on like combining the village and the town police department. Would there be efficiency, similar to the fire, right? Would there be efficiencies that way as well? Are you familiar with other communities that maybe have done that or no?
Sure. It's fairly common, or in other counties. I was in Salem Lakes as the interim administrator. They had the Kenosha County Sheriff, as a number of communities do out there, larger ones, 14,000 population. In Walworth County, not as common. I think Darien might be the only,
Village Darien
is the only place policed by Delavan, and so the sheriff doesn't have any contracts, at least when I left. And I don't know how those were. There were departments that were more anxious to take on additional business then. Now everybody's struggling for staffing, so I don't even know what kind of response you would get from the community. Some of those deals were good, others not so good, but you should educate. You know, it's a large expenditure in a relatively small budget, and so you should be comfortable with.
Yeah. Just to be clear, though, like we are miles from when we had that discussion, and I think it would be a huge detriment to like impact our current police force.
We appreciate that.
But I just thought that the only thing referred to here was the sheriff. So.
Oh yeah.
there's several examples of towns and villages or cities.
I think Waterford, right?
They got their own police department back again, I believe now.
Oh, the town and the police separated? Or the town and the village? I think they're consolidated
They
there.
consolidated and then they almost lost their entire department.
Right.
Racine County, and I think they're back again now, so it's
Right.
a polar deal over there.
Not a lot of communication in those couple of situations, I think. We had one other, right, Big Bend?
Yeah, didn't Big Bend have a big
Big
group
Ben
of them?
lost their,
Big fiasco.
they all exited.
You definitely, in my opinion, you get a different level of policing. I mean,
Yes.
you'd notice it. So, but enough said on that. 10, engage a planner or a planning firm to assist with complex zoning matters. We were very impressed with the system that you have set up for zoning, Chris, and the forms and.
Oh, very much so. It was, for not having a planner on staff, you do a very good job. I just saw that, you know, many times when you're under county zoning, and Dave, you know this more than I in Walworth County, but the county will actually be your planner if you're a town, or you can contract if you're a city. What's Walworth County? What kind of relationship with the town of East Troy?
Well, they have general zoning and they'll assist with plans, but at a level probably less than a paid planner.
you don't have a lot of complex zoning matters here. Not always, just a few. But it could be beneficial to have an outside planner to come in and evaluate it before they go to the plan commission. Sit down with the planning chair, the attorney, planner, and your planning assistant. And ahead of time, before it goes to the plan commission, just like we said, to have before you go to the board and get something on the agenda, you have a memo with staff recommendations or planning recommendations, and do that. In most communities, you have to have at least a week, but usually 2 weeks to get on the plan commission. You can't just get on the next day.
Yeah, we do that.
So, you can hire a planner on a case-by-case basis. Most of the places I've worked is, if you're having a development, you have to put $5,000 down to pay for the planner, the engineer, and all of that ahead of time. So, a planner on staff won't cost you anything because a big development, they have to pay the fees for the planner and the engineer or whoever else. So something to think about is to have that support for your staff. Sometimes the attorneys do it, but they're not as good. They look at it differently than a planner. But if someone has a big plan, let's make it a quick trip. You don't need more quick trips, but let's just say there's a quick trip that wants to come to the town. That's a big evaluation, is it, is it zoned correctly, the setbacks. It's really a complex, I've been through many of those. You need a planner to review the whole thing, and then when it gets to the commission, you can, and eventually the board, because it takes rezoning, you have a really good document, you have a good study on it, and it makes life a lot easier. It just does, if you have that ahead of time.
We don't have any good developments here.
No, I'm just saying.
We usually, when I was on the planning commission, I would usually just call the county, Darren, and just say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? He doesn't say, hey, it should be this or that. He'll say, it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this, but, or, you know what I mean?
Technical
And then,
analysis is what they do.
right, he's really good at that.
Have them put it in writing and, as a part of that, they do.
Right.
And for the record, they do have pre-planning meetings for bigger things. So if they're putting like a subdivision like the Berkeys, they had a pre-meeting. When Sawyer was looking to do where he was leveling that area, he had a pre-meeting ahead of time, went through all of that with county, knew what the lines were, and then he had to achieve that before he could even bring it to us. It's
Right.
not like they're just.
So you may have solved for
putting
this,
things
I just didn't,
So, I mean, it's there, it could be better, but it's
It-
there.
Yeah, I think it should be more available to the commissioners to call Darren, because like, it was just tough for me when I was on there just to know, hey, I should just call this guy. That's my point of contact. You know what I
But I
mean?
think the orientation changed that. And
Right.
And I think that was a good time to start it.
Yeah.
I always thought it would be nice to have, you want to call it a planning, whatever, or a liaison or something, a person to go between the resident or the builder or whatever and the planning commission to make that path so much smoother. Because someone that just, a normal person walking in doesn't always know what they're supposed to do. And they're, oh, you gotta go to the county, oh, you gotta do, and then all of a sudden 4 or 5 months go by, where if you had this person, they could be like, okay, this is what you need to do, blah, blah, blah.
We kind of eliminated that in the last 2 years.
But we have her to be that.
We don't
Yeah.
have the back and forth at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they go to her, she
It's
knows.
just more technical assistance as you need it. And the idea of charging for technical assistance from the outside, I think is important. A developer doesn't cost you anything, that they pay for your professional services. Those are good things we thought.
Yeah, I think it would be worth now just establishing a relationship maybe, or at least testing the waters on what's out there. I'd see it as twofold. I mean, I think you do a great job right now, but I do think I would, and I've sat in enough zoning meetings, in my life, but I think having, Foth, there's other planners like that, just to get a name and a face and get a rate schedule, and maybe, the first engagement would just be to look at, this is our practice right now, give us a critique, here's a county plan, what's missing, because things, can be missing from those too. But just to get, validate the process that you're doing right now, and then also to develop that relationship, so when you do have a complex zoning case, you've got somebody there who is, attuned and can work with the county. And Chris is right, we would, wherever, call it a developer's agreement or whatever it is, one of the first steps, if you do have a developer, is they'd come in and sign off on paying for the costs associated with that professional help.
Or you can put it in the ordinance.
Or the ordinance. The last thing we had on the planning was just the same-day decisions, which we had kind of noted, I think you've been moving towards with the Planning Commission, as opposed to 2 separate meetings for the decision. I applaud that and encourage it. I just went through a variance with myself, but having as a homeowner, having a single meeting is nicer. And honestly, sometimes you have to pause to get additional information, to have staff, find something out for you. But in general, when you close the public hearing, nothing good is going to happen after that, really, because with the contact that board members receive is not appropriate. And if you got the information, render the decision and move on that night. Rick Stacy, I had seen him last night at the Tri-Troy meeting, and he did that with the county zoning 18 years ago. And you thought we were landing a man on the moon when that was so complicated, but it actually worked out. So. We had leveraged the county's GIS system. And I won't go into great depth there, but we think there's some utility that you can get out of that. And maybe having a discussion with those folks, have them come in and see what it could do for you. Updating your long-range comp plan. And I don't know what your thought process is with that, but I think that also gets into kind of that shared vision, or what you want your community to look like. And
I think you would need a strategic plan before you go too far on this one. Because many times that the county does their plan for you, right? And you have some say in it. But what if you want to grow as a town? Not that I'm suggesting you grow as a town, but let's say your strategic plan says, we would like to have an area with utilities and have, smaller lots. Not saying you should, just saying, well, that has to be in the comprehensive land use plan. Corporate council, that's what, you gotta have that in there. So, the strategic plan should tie to the comprehensive land use plan to make sure that, are you done with your 2050 plan now, or?
That's been done. We have 2 amendments coming through in November that are going to be heard by the county now.
And you can always amend it. It's the county plan. So it's just something, identifying growth areas, if you want that fit with them. You would have to explore border agreements if you wanted utilities. Not easy for the faint of heart, but just those are the things that came up during discussions about, what does the town want to be in the future? Does it want to have maybe some areas that have more urban type development, or do you want to stay rural? It doesn't, that's your decision as part of your strategic plan. But if you decide you want to maybe look at a different design to your town, you have to work with the county. That's basically what this says.
Good. Number 13, consider establishing a stormwater utility. So this is especially important for Lake community, or at least a consideration for you. And so what a stormwater utility allows you to do is to collect revenue that you use for stormwater improvements, and the revenue is paid by property owners based on impervious surface, typically in their land, on their land, right? So if I buy a lake lot and pave a big driveway on it. I'm creating stormwater runoff that the town has ultimately got to deal with. And so if you properly set one of these up, you can, it's an extra bill that you can send out. Now, right there, well, we're dinging taxpayers. You know, we're dinging or being punitive to taxpayers, but if if you look at and do the long-term stormwater planning, the price tags can be just staggering on those things, and you need a long time to plan a project, you need a lot of money to do it, and this would be a way to do it, I think more equitably than the tax equalized value, would apportion the bill for this. You also can have nonprofits are subject to it as well. It's not a tax, it's a fee. So it's not for every community, but for lake communities particularly, you've got some very unique drainage issues that this could.
In many towns, because they're very rural and not densely developed, really don't need this, but, it's something that you have a stormwater engineer, I imagine, that reviews your stormwater plan at one time. So you should do a stormwater study before you do anything, and I'm not sure if you have any big issues. I'm not sure. My guess is it's only in certain areas, certain basins.
Various two spots that I can right off the top of my head that we actually have any type of
So it may
issue
not
with stormwater.
be relevant here, but it's something to look at and do a stormwater study.
Yeah, just an option for you. Let's see, we segued into staffing next, number 14. And so we kind of set this up at the beginning of the meeting. We don't believe that you're overstaffed. In fact, at the end, we would recommend adding probably a half-time FTE. And we've got some suggestions in there as to how that position could be utilized. If you do decide to create the administrator position or part position, also you should seriously consider some administrative support for that position, because oftentimes that can be made a lot more effective by having a good administrative support and good processes and automation set up for that. So, as we said earlier, I don't know that you could run a public works department any leaner than 3. I haven't seen it, I guess, so could probably use some more. The police, I think, are staffed minimally to provide 24/7 coverage. In fact, one of the dilemmas here is when you're firing on all 8 cylinders, you can keep the lights on and everything working, but it rarely works out that way. Somebody will be off on a workers' comp injury or FMLA or quit, and then you're in a bind. I mean, then you're looking at overtime and bringing people in, and that sets off its own downward spiral of people who are upset because they're working too much. So you got to be very careful with that. So we would not recommend any kind of reductions at all. We think cross training is important. Your clerk treasurer is very proficient in complex accounting. We would say that, but there aren't staff members who could readily back her up. So sharing the wealth and we suggest doing that through standard operating procedures and a structured training program. And as far as SOPs go, or procedures, I talked about my fetish for ordinances, and I also have one for administrative procedures. We had actually ordinances, administrative procedures, and departmental rules in that order. But they were written, they were done in a consistent format, and so we've noticed in the police department the SOPs are there, and they're legally required to have some, and so those are important to have them. But we would suggest that for all the departments to do it even if you have it on a shared drive. I would recommend that, so the Department of Public Works can see the clerk's procedures and vice versa, and board members can look at this and know what's going on. So establishing those, and the problem is there's a lot of good things in organizations that are written down, and a lot of memory from serving in a position for 30 years or something, and then when those people leave, it's like it's gone. I mean, it is, and everybody's like, oh, how do we do this? And so it's anyway. There's some recommendations in there. We're you're gonna have your ideas on that as well. I think part of this will depend on whether you think an administrator is a worthy add for your organization, but if so, we would suggest that there's enough work for at least a half-time FTE.
You said three things, ordinances, procedures, and then what was it?
We just had like departmental rules or work rules, so it was, and in the hierarchy, the ordinances were done by the board. The administrative procedures were done by the administrator, but they had to be consistent with the ordinances. They couldn't, they would take that and explain it further. And then the work rules were just, departmental rules were what governs the day-to-day operations and, public works, safety shoes, and, all those things, so that hierarchy and to really, record it. And any thoughts on that, on those procedures? I'll finish up here, you guys have been patient. So we had improving records management, and I think here, there's, you've got a records retention ordinance, and, I think the stakeholders were familiar with the necessity to keep records. I think one of the main issues was the ability to find them and retrieve them and store them.
Almost every community I go into, this is a recommendation, because it's one of those things nobody has time for. But yet when you're trying to find something, it's almost impossible. I asked one community, I said, where's your records kept? They pointed to a big building next door. And that's all they had, so it happens a lot. You got the policy, and you gotta decide many communities don't have, do you have central files? Or does the public works keep their own, and police keep their own, and that?
Police
Of
keeps
course,
their
have
own,
to,
but the
some
other
police
stuff
have
is,
to.
Yeah, Todd has his stuff, yeah.
Creating a
Some of
central
it's commingled.
filing process, and then, doing your scanning over 3 to 5 years it usually takes, so that you can have access at any time to any document. It's important, and especially it's going to be more important as life goes on, with, automation and continuing. So I would really suggest that, and we go into detail on this in our report, about, starting the procedure, starting the process. If you have any questions on that, Laserfish, I'm not advertising for them, but they tend to be, the Clerks Association uses them, recommends them. They really do a good job. So again, it's something that over time, improving your records management is important. That's really what it says.
What's the name of that company, did you say?
Laserfish.
Laserfish is one of them, there are 2 or 3.
There's a lot of vendors that sell it, but,
If you want to spell it.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different companies.
It's a good, project over time. You might want to, there's companies that'll, they'll package it up and send it to them, and they'll scan it and get it back here, or scan it and destroy it, whatever you want. And you can budget, like the place I'm at now, I think it's $5,000 a year or something like that. So journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and you'd be amazed all of a sudden those years are gone out of the filing cabinets and saved. 16 was just, I had already kind of jumped into that, and that's talking about the administrative procedures and departmental rules. I have some ideas in the study document as to some of the benefits and maybe how to do that. But I think consistent format and location for those are important. Because otherwise, if it's just everybody go and do their own thing, then it's lost to the four winds and it's back to the collective memory thing again. So if you want, you can come up with your own format, but I would do a shared file that everybody has access to and start policy number 1 or procedure 1. And then our final recommendation is just miscellaneous, and I think that the first one just talked about customer transaction alternatives to allow payment online to the extent you can. Allow fillable forms, anything to cut down on counter traffic. Those kiosks, we got those in Lynn for the boats right now. Those are pretty slick, except when the credit card machine doesn't work, which was last week. But in general, they're nice because it's just seamless. Goes on. And then there was a topic that had come up about the use of line carbon copies in communication, and we just had a little note on that. And it's not bad, there's nothing naughty about doing it, but it's got to be understood, and you all have to be comfortable with it. So the reason why BCC was, can't come up with it, or why some organizations mandate the use of that in board communications is so somebody can't hit the reply all, and then they've inadvertently created a meeting, right, by saying, I vote no, and then I vote yes. So the idea is the blind carbon keeps dummies like me from doing reply all. You can't do it as an option. So that's, but it can sound bad, right? Well, they're getting blind copies, so that was done secretly. So figure out either be comfortable. I've been in organizations that we've done, that was the protocol, blind copies, or if not, then education is the key, so board members know what they can and can't do.
Does it need to become a procedure?
I would.
Yeah. So then it's documented, everybody knows how you're using it.
Yep. So that was our conclusions. We've got a little summary sheet in there with you can use if I hope you take some of these and implement them. We've got a few examples when we can certainly provide more, and some vendor names that we said. Chris had got notes, and I can get you some of those people. But any comments or closing comments on this, or thoughts, or?
There's a lot more details, obviously, but they did this today, so obviously we have to digest this.
I would just thank you. I think you have done a lot of detailed investigation, and I do plan on leaning on you for templates and stuff.
I'm happy to do that, and I wanted to get even more in here, but it's time.
I know, but I do appreciate it. I don't know what everybody else thinks.
I think it was great.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
And this format is nice, like the first section is like all the detail, but then I love the summary, so we can have a quick checklist in the back of, and what we can prioritize and put in a date timeline.
What some people have done, some boards with that, is they had a meeting with the board and the staff, and they went through it, not a strategic plan, but it's a way that you can discuss them and, who should do this, what's a really realistic timetable, or, hey, screw that, we're not gonna do that. So I think it gives you a chance to get together and.
Sure.
And
It probably explains some misunderstandings between how I feel, part of the staff field or whatever. I don't understand what they have going on. They don't, well, they all understand what I have going on.
So how do we do all of this, given the levy and
That's our job.
Well, I think a financial advisor is help as well, someone who has that big picture. Not the accountant, but a financial advisor can help as well. But it's not easy. But you can't say, no, we can't do anything. That's kind of the thing.
And some of the items are not optional, because, you got contracts with employees, right? So that, the clock is running, so you gotta solve that. And that probably should be on the top of the heap. And, maybe you wanna look at getting that team together on the handbook, get things started as a possibility. And then maybe talk about, are you gonna renew contracts for a period? Get that set. And then, honestly, if it were me, and I know, I hate spending other people's money, I really feel very strongly about that administrator stipend, and I feel strongly about that half-time position as something to try to fit in your budget next year. I think that will make a big difference in terms of just how relations and smoothing things out. That class comp study is maybe, I put 10 grand in the budget as a working number for that. I think that can do a lot of good for you, because then you'll have at least your employees, I think there'll be some certainty for them, and they can take a deep breath, and you guys will have a system, the board. So those would be some of the higher priorities, I think, that I would look at, but not cheap, not easy.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're not gonna do it all in 1 year, so it's a matter of, it's a document to refer back to.
So would you recommend to the board that whatever they try to do it statutorily, like through a board vote, so that it sticks, so if we have a new administration come in or whatever, the improvements only get built on instead of swept up under the rug.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to, otherwise you just keep, it's like Groundhog Day, and that's my ordinance fetish. If you don't fix it and declare it and memorialize it, you'll relive it.
Yeah, a lot of these things don't cost money, but they cost time. You know, I mean, it's a lot of resources, internal resources, and so that's why you can't do it all the time. But it doesn't cost anything except, you know, just the cost, but it's not a budget.
Yeah, like your handbook could be almost free, but it's not from cost, but it's staff intensive. Any other questions for the good of the order here? You've been patient. Again, we appreciate the cooperation of staff and supervisors. We had a wonderful visit here, and we think you got a lot going for you. We've seen a lot of places.
And we are here for resources, for phone calls, or Dave or I, you know, for any kind of follow-up.
Getting on the same sheet of music. I think you got a lot of talent here and a lot of passionate board members. You're not always going to agree on everything, but agree on a lot of things and then agree to disagree on the others. You guys are going to be all right.
Oh, maybe the federal government can do that.
That's beyond that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Very much. Appreciate it. I got pens.
Time for our budget.
I make a motion, we adjourn?
I'll second.
Any discussion on adjournment? Nope. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, we didn't catch the first and second.
Tyson and myself.
You know who the first was.
Thank you.